Welcome to week 2 of our 365-day Bible reading plan as we work through the Bible recap and as we read the Bible in chronological order. This week we are in the book of Job and we're in the middle of it. So if you are following along, this week we're starting in chapter 17 and we're going all the way through Job chapter 39. And this is going to be a really big week. Right off the bat, Job is continuing to maintain his innocence. If you read the first few chapters of Job, you know what happened to him. He lost everything, and he's in the middle of trying to figure all of this out. And so his friends show up, and they sit with him for 7 days in silence, as kind of good friends would do, and they mourn with him. But after those 7 days, they kind of speak up and they don't hold back. They don't really hold back their thoughts or their feelings toward why they believe all of these things have happened to Job. And so in chapter 17, he continues to maintain his innocence. And from these passages throughout this week, we see that Job continues to demonstrate extraordinary faith in God. Even though he doesn't have all the answers, he still understands that God is God and he is not. But he does go kind of back and forth. He realizes sometimes that, you know, life life might just be better if it didn't exist. His existence may have been better if he had died before he was born. And so he's feeling extraordinary pain, but he still has extraordinary faith in God. He maintains a perspective of spiritual refinement. In chapter 23, Job says, in chapter 23, verse 10, let me find it right here. He says, "But God knows the way that I take, and when he has tried me, I shall come out as gold." And so he sees all of these trials not as a way of punishment or a form of punishment from God, but as a way to grow in his faith. And so, yes, as they are extremely hard to go through, Job isn't saying, at least in this section, that he wishes God wouldn't have done it. I'm sure at times he feels that way, but at the same time, he's saying, I'm going through this, and this is a part of life, and so I'm going to come out refined. And refining something means to strip away the impurities. And so all of these impurities in Job's life are being stripped away so that he can more fully trust in God and who God is. And so Job is also expressing a deep, unwavering belief in God as his redeemer. God has sent these things upon him as he believes, but God is also able to redeem him. And so he is confidently proclaiming that God will ultimately redeem him and that he will ultimately see God even after his death. And in the meantime, we have this section for the next 4 days where Job and his friends are going back and forth. Job is maintaining his innocence, claiming that he has done nothing wrong to deserve God's wrath. But his friends on the other side are saying, no, you have. Obviously, all of these things happen, and they only happen to bad people who have done something wrong against God. And so from their perspective, they believe Job has done something wrong. And from Job's perspective, he knows that he's done nothing wrong. And so he maintains his innocence. And I think it's important to kind of clarify that Job never claims to have been perfect. He never claims to have been sinless. He never claims to have been any sort of upright, outstanding citizen. The book of Job claims that he was an upright man. He sought after God. He offered sacrifices to God on behalf of his children and probably on behalf of himself and the rest of his family as well. And so we know that there were offerings that were sacrificed to God to take place of sin, and so we know that that was a part of his life, as it is a part of everybody's life. But the point of the book of Job is not that God punishes us for our sins. Um, it's that sometimes trials come, sometimes suffering happens, and that's just it. We shouldn't take that posture of being victimized or outcast from God. We should, like Job, see it as an opportunity to purify ourselves, to purify our faith, and to really grow in our trust of God when everything else has been stripped away and God is all that's left. Job says, "This is all I need." And then on day 12, so in chapter 32, we are introduced to a new character. His name is Elihu, and he says some things that are on his mind as well. For up to this point, we had Job, we had his three friends, and now we realize that there was a fourth person sitting there listening to their conversations back and forth, and he has kind of had enough of the back and forth, the banter, and so he speaks his mind. But Elihu comes to some false conclusions. They're not very true. He assumes some things about God, and while some of the things that he says are wise, the conclusions that he comes to are not wise. And so he continues through these next 2 days. So from chapters 32 until chapter 37, Elihu has the floor. And then finally, on the last day of this week, we will read Job chapter 38 and 39. And this is when God speaks. And finally, when confronted by God, Job acknowledges his own insignificance, because God basically says, you're a human, and there are some things that you're just not going to understand. There are some things that are too great for you to understand. And that's one of the truths, one of the simple truths of our life, is that sometimes we just are not built, we're not made to understand everything. Some things are just beyond our comprehension and our understanding, and that's okay. And I think that's really hard for us to come to terms with, especially in this this media age where, we can have information as fast as we can think about it. So one of the things that we want to continue to grow on, and one of the things that we want to continue to lean into, is just trusting God, even when we don't have all the answers, and even when we don't have even the answer that we want, because some things are simply beyond our reach. But God confronts Job directly, and Job acknowledges his own insignificance, and he chooses to be silent rather than recognizing his limitations. We read that in Job chapter 40, so that we'll read that next week. But Job's earlier attitude of complete surrender is very significant here. He realizes, God is God and I am not. This is something that I've asked God, I've questioned God, but God says, "Who are you to question me? Were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth? Were you there when I created the animals? Were you there when I created the sky? Were you there? Do you see all of these things?" And I think when we take a step back and we say, I see things from my perspective, I don't quite see them from God's perspective. Maybe because God sees it in a way that I can't. Maybe I just put my faith in him. Maybe I just trust him. And so this week, as we're reading, find yourself in a place where you are reminded that God is God and we are not. And it's okay to question God. It's okay to ask questions. God offers those spaces for us, and he loves us enough to ask those questions. If we don't ask questions, we're not going to grow in our faith. And so this week, I encourage you, as you're reading, write down, make marks, write questions, um, post on this thread, post the comments under this video, or post your own thread of things that stand out to you. Because if they stand out to you, chances are they're going to stand out to somebody else. And if you ask a question, maybe somebody else is a little timid to ask themselves. Maybe it'll help answer their questions as well. Church, I'm praying for you as we continue on this Bible journey. I pray that God continues to speak to you. I pray that He continues to inspire you and that you continue to draw close to Him as you read His Word each and every day. I love you. I'm so proud of you for taking on this journey, and we'll see you next week.